The stranger walked into the dojo carrying nothing but a bucket, an old mop, and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to hope. Everyone laughed when they saw him. He wore a faded work shirt, worn-out shoes, and trousers stained with cleaning chemicals. He looked completely out of place among the polished black belts, expensive uniforms, and championship trophies that covered the walls. But the moment the reigning champion, Soren Vale, looked into the stranger's eyes, his smile disappeared. Soren had faced fighters twice his size without fear, yet something about this quiet man made his instincts scream that something was terribly wrong. The stranger slowly lowered the mop, looked around the dojo, and whispered that he was only there to clean. But Soren noticed something nobody else noticed. The man was holding the mop like someone who had spent years learning how to survive. If you believe that kindness can change a life and that everyone deserves a second chance, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Dad's Soul Diaries. Sometimes the person who looks the weakest is carrying a story powerful enough to change everyone around them. It was a warm afternoon in the small town of Redhaven, and sunlight poured through the tall windows of the Iron Crane Dojo, turning the wooden floor golden. The academy was preparing for its biggest tournament of the year. Soren Vale, 27 years old, was the reigning regional champion and the pride of the dojo. His name was printed on banners near the entrance, his medals hung beneath framed photographs, and young students watched him as if he were a living legend. Yet despite his success, Soren had recently begun feeling strangely empty. He could win fights, but he could not explain why every victory felt less meaningful than the one before. His instructor, Master Tobran Ash, often told him that skill could make a champion, but character made a person. Soren understood the words, but he had not yet learned how deeply they were true. That afternoon, while the students practiced, the front door opened slowly. A man entered carrying a gray plastic bucket and a mop. He was perhaps in his late 40s, though the tiredness in his face made him look older. His hair was uneven, his beard untrimmed, and there was a faint scar running from beneath his left ear toward his jaw. He stopped near the entrance and looked around as if he expected someone to tell him he had made a mistake. The receptionist pointed toward the storage room and told him that the previous cleaner had quit. The man nodded silently. His name was Garrick Rowe. He had been hired for temporary cleaning work because the dojo needed someone before the tournament. Nobody knew much about him. He had arrived in Redhaven only a few days earlier, rented a tiny room above an old bakery, and asked for no special treatment. The younger students laughed quietly when he started cleaning. One even made a joke about the champion having a new opponent with a mop. Soren did not laugh. He watched Garrick move across the floor. There was something strangely controlled about every step. The mop moved smoothly, but Garrick never turned his back completely toward the room. His eyes constantly scanned the doors and windows. When a heavy training bag swung unexpectedly, his body shifted instantly before the bag came close to him. Soren noticed. A person did not move like that unless life had taught them to expect danger. Over the next several days, Garrick became part of the background. He arrived early, cleaned the floors, emptied the bins, wiped the mirrors, and left before most students went home. He spoke very little. But Soren continued watching him. One morning, Soren accidentally dropped a metal water bottle. The loud crash startled everyone. Garrick reacted before anyone else. He turned sharply, stepped backward, raised one arm defensively, and froze. The entire dojo went quiet. Garrick slowly lowered his arm. He apologized and returned to cleaning. Soren walked over and asked if he was okay. Garrick simply nodded. But his eyes told a different story. That evening, Soren stayed late. As he was leaving, he saw Garrick sitting alone near the entrance. The cleaning bucket was beside him. His hands were shaking. He was staring at an old photograph he had pulled from his pocket. Soren could not see the photograph clearly, but he saw the expression on Garrick's face. It was grief. Not ordinary sadness. The kind of grief that had been carried for years. Soren quietly walked away, deciding not to intrude. The next afternoon, something happened that changed everything. A group of teenagers from another martial arts school came into the dojo to watch Soren train. They were loud, arrogant, and disrespectful. One of them shoved Garrick as he walked past with his bucket. The water spilled across the floor. Everyone expected Garrick to become angry. Instead, he simply knelt down and began cleaning. The teenager laughed and pushed the bucket away with his foot. Soren stepped forward. Before Soren could say anything, Garrick gently caught the teenager's wrist. It happened so quickly that nobody understood what they had seen. Garrick did not hurt him. He simply stopped him. The teenager tried to pull away, but Garrick's grip remained steady. Then Garrick released him and quietly returned to cleaning. Soren stared at him. That grip was not the grip of an ordinary cleaner. It was the grip of someone trained at an elite level. Master Torbjorn noticed too. Later that night, Soren asked his instructor who Garrick really was. Master Torbjorn had no answer. But the following morning, he began making calls. By noon, the truth started to emerge. Years earlier, Garrick Rowe had been a professional martial artist. Not a local fighter. Not an amateur. He had competed at the highest level in the country. He had won major tournaments and was considered one of the most technically gifted fighters of his generation. Then, 7 years earlier, he had disappeared from the sport after a tragic incident. Soren was stunned. He searched Garrick's name and found old photographs. The tired man carrying a mop had once stood beneath bright stadium lights wearing championship gloves. He had a powerful reputation. But beneath the photographs were stories about a devastating accident. Garrick had been driving home after a tournament when another vehicle crossed into his lane. His younger brother, Kalen, had been in the passenger seat. Garrick survived. Kalen did not. Garrick blamed himself because he had insisted that his brother come to the tournament. After the funeral, Garrick never fought again. He left his career, sold his house, disappeared from the martial arts world, and spent years moving from place to place. Soren finally understood the sadness in those eyes. But there was something else. A week before the tournament, Garrick collapsed while cleaning. Soren caught him before his head struck the floor. The dojo staff called for help, but Garrick refused to go to the hospital. He insisted that he was fine. Soren did not believe him. Eventually, Garrick admitted that he had been experiencing severe chest pain for months. He had ignored it because he had no money for treatment. Soren was furious. Not at Garrick. At himself. He had spent thousands on training equipment, supplements, travel, and competition fees, while a man working in his dojo was quietly suffering because he could not afford medical care. Soren paid for Garrick's examination. The doctors discovered a serious heart condition that required treatment. Garrick needed surgery, but he kept refusing because he did not want anyone to feel responsible for him. Soren refused to accept that answer. He organized a fundraiser through the dojo. At first, only a few people contributed. Then the story spread. Students began donating. Parents contributed. Former fighters came forward. Even the teenagers who had once mocked Garrick returned and apologized. Within weeks, enough money had been raised for the surgery. But Garrick still had one final request. He wanted to step onto the dojo floor again. Not to fight. Just to stand there. On the morning of his surgery, Soren helped him put on an old martial arts uniform. Garrick walked slowly onto the wooden floor. The students stood silently around him. He looked at the trophies on the wall. Then he looked at Soren. For the first time since entering the dojo, he smiled. Soren asked him to teach the students one thing before leaving. Garrick looked around the room. He placed the mop against the wall. Then he demonstrated a simple defensive movement. His body was older now. His strength had faded. His heart was weak. But his technique was still beautiful. Every student watched in silence. Garrick showed them that the first rule of martial arts was not how to hurt someone. It was how to protect someone. That lesson changed Soren more than any championship ever had. Garrick went into surgery the next morning. The operation lasted several hours. Soren waited outside with Master Tobrin and dozens of students. Nobody spoke. When the doctor finally walked through the doors and said the surgery had gone well, Soren closed his eyes and cried. The champion who had never cried after losing a fight was crying because a man who once seemed invisible had been given another chance at life. Months later, Garrick returned to the dojo. He was weaker, thinner, and walked with a cane. But the mop was still in his hand. The students laughed when they saw him. This time, it was not cruel laughter. It was happiness. Garrick slowly cleaned the same wooden floor he had cleaned months earlier. Then Soren walked over and took the mop from him. He told Garrick that he did not have to clean anymore. Garrick smiled and pointed toward the training floor. He wanted to teach.